As I transition to a formal teaching role, I want to make sure I make things optimal, so I hope that you'll fill out this quick questionnaire to help me as I try to prepare. I'm very excited that this fall I'm starting as a full-time visiting professor of biochemistry at St. Mary's College of California, my alma mater, my dream school. So I'm very excited and I want to make sure that I give these students the best biochemistry education possible. And so I want your help. I'm hoping that you fill out this quick form telling me about some of the things that you found the most confusing when you were learning biochemistry, things that your professors did that you found really helpful, content that you wish you had covered more or that you had focused on more, various things like this. And I hope that you will fill out this form, and so here's a look at what's on it. So first off, thank you all in advance for filling this out, as well as for just supporting me so much along this journey as I have developed as a scientist and am now moving into this new role. So I want to know, what was the concept or the concepts that you found most confusing or challenging when you were learning biochemistry? And if you know why, why? So for me, I found it really hard to remember all the levels of regulation of metabolic pathways, what kinases were activating what or inactivating what, things like this. There was a lot of kind of memorization, and I prefer to think in terms of concepts rather than memorizing, even though sometimes there are things that you're going to need to memorize. But so I found that to be one of the more challenging aspects of biochemistry. Sometimes there are also challenging things because there's a lot of terminology that's used. And so were there terms whose meanings you were unclear about, but maybe you were embarrassed to ask? So I want to make sure that when I'm teaching, I'm not accidentally using words that I haven't explained. It can be really easy to forget that we need to explain words these first time because they become so familiar to us. So for me, a couple of the words that was confused about were like residue. So basically what you call the leftovers of amino acids once they're linked together into peptides or proteins, and assay, which is basically just a word for an experiment where we're measuring something. Speaking of confusing terms, if you look things up, if you're reading something on my blog, you'll see that I have a dictionary, and there are words in the dictionary that if you scroll over them on the page, they'll tell you about what that word means and take you to the entry in the glossary if you click on them. So on a more positive note, what was your favorite topic or lesson in a biochemistry class? So I still remember our lesson on ATP synthase, and Dr. Vidya showed us this animation of the structure of this tiny little machine doing all this work inside of our cells. And I just found it so, so fascinating. And it also was one of my first introductions to structural biology, or basically the field of biology where we're looking at molecules at what they look like on the molecular and atomic level. And so I found that super duper cool, and I've never forgotten that. Is there anything you wish had been covered more in your biochemistry classes? So there's no way that I can cover all the content of biochemistry, even in the 2-semester course. So I'm going to be teaching a 1-semester course, more of a survey or overview course for like biology majors, as well as a 2-semester course for biochemistry majors. And so there's going to be 1 semester focused more on like the structure of nucleic acids and proteins and things like this. And then the 2nd semester focused more on metabolism. But I'm going to have to pick and choose some of the topics that I'm going to cover because I can't cover everything no matter how much I would want to. But I want to make sure that I'm covering the most important things and the things that that the students will be the most valuable for the students. And so when I was taking biochemistry, one of the things I had to get cut out was the pentose phosphate pathway, which I understand why it had to be cut out. But if I found it, when I learned more about it later, I found it really, really fascinating. So I wish I had learned more about the pentose phosphate pathway. I also wish that we had a little more content on like accessing and using databases, things like Uniprot, where you can go find information about proteins, the PDB, where you can go look at structures, and GenBank, where you can get information about DNA sequences and RNA sequences and things like this. Part of this is probably because I then went off to grad school where I had to use these things a lot, but I do think that they would be helpful for just even people who aren't going off to grad school. I find that especially more and more with the trends towards increasing amounts of data, that having more content on accessing and using these databases would have been helpful. And so I'm hoping to include a little bit more of that into basically incorporate it more into both the lectures and the lab sessions. So I'm going to be teaching both lecture and lab, and hopefully I'll get the students very familiar with using these tools, as well as get the libraries help in helping these students kind of be able to navigate all of the various resources and PubMed and all this various stuff. So I'm really excited about helping them, show them the resources that they can use to continue using their education throughout their lifetime. Okay, so hindsight's 2020. Is there anything you wish you had known or done when taking biochemistry? So I wish I'd focus more on thinking in terms of nucleophiles and electrophiles and drawing connections between OChem and biochem. I know that a lot of people kind of dread OChem. I really loved OChem. And if you can see the connections between organic chemistry and biochemistry, it helps you understand what's going on in biochemistry and all those pathways. So you don't just focus on memorizing things. Instead, you kind of follow the flow of electrons and all that good stuff that you did in organic chemistry. And this helps you think about what reactions you might expect to happen or not expect to happen, and how pathways might flow, how various, especially in metabolism and things like this, like why are you adding a phosphate group here? And where do you expect this molecule to get broken? Things like this, which if you think about things in terms of the organic chemistry, it can make things really helpful. It's also important to focus on kind of how things are different in the body than they are in and under physiological or bodily conditions than they are in organic chemistry. So when we're dealing with things in the body and inside of cells, you have enzymes, you have this aqueous or all watery solution, where conditions are a lot different than the conditions of organic chemistry, where we're often dealing with things that are in like non-polar solvents and things like this. So it's kind of helpful to think about, okay, well, how are we able to do all these reactions inside of cells that we can't do in a test tube, or we can do these things in a test tube, but we can't do them inside of cells, or they work differently inside of cells. And it's the same processes at play, but we have different factors helping things out. So we have enzymes making reactions happen that would never happen in a test tube, or we have conditions that are preventing reactions from happening that would happen in a test tube, and things like this. So really thinking about those connections between organic chemistry and biochemistry can be really helpful. What was something a science professor did that you found very helpful? So like teaching strategies and things. For example, I had this professor who ended every lecture with giving us 5 minutes for us to write a reflection paragraph summarizing the lesson, as well as like our kind of just thoughts about how it connects to what we've learned already and things like this. I found this super duper helpful. So instead of kind of like going to the very last minute and then rushing off to your next class, this really made you kind of digest all the information and write something down that you can look back at later to remind yourself of what you were thinking at the end of the class. So I'm hoping to do something similar in my courses. What actually I'm thinking I might do is kind of in the beginning of the lecture, do a kind of like pre-lesson check-in where I have the students like on an index card or something, just write down what they summarize their pre-reading and like watching videos or whatever that they had to do before class, kind of summarize what they learned and what's still confusing to them. And then at the end of class, do the same thing. So like, what did they learn during the class, and are there concepts that are still confusing to them? And then I could use this feedback in order to help design the next lesson, as well as to see if they were doing the pre-work and things like this. So that's just one idea I'm thinking of. I had another professor who introduced us to mind mapping, which is basically making these big flowcharts connecting concepts. And so I have a video on the post on this that I made the other day. In case you want to learn about that, I use this tool called draw.io, which I found really helpful. So I'll probably introduce my students to that as well. It's this free tool that just allows you to make these big flowcharts and mind maps and things like this. So Dr. Keith Garrison did the whole reflection thing. So I want to thank him, as well as Dr. Vidya, who introduced us to that mind mapping. So thanks to both of them. And I'm looking forward to being able to call them colleagues in a month or so. Okay, what is something I do or have said that you found the most helpful, so I can make sure to include or incorporate this as possible?
And is there anything else I should know? And so thank you so much for taking the time to fill this out. I sincerely appreciate it. I'm not collecting any personal data or anything like this. Just kind of trying to get your input on what things could be the most helpful so that I can make sure that I teach the most effectively. And not only was this going to help me teach the students in the classroom, but hopefully it'll also help improve my content that through the Bumbling Biochemist blog and YouTube and all that various stuff. So thanks again, thanks in advance, and thank you.